I will do in my hopefully not too long-winded way. So for the first one, let me start with saying that about a week ago, I was in Washington, basically listening to a lot of departments working about all the innovative things that they're doing in terms of reaching out to various communities with mathematics and mathematics education and things like that. And it was a remarkably repetitive experience, with the one exception when I mentioned nonlinear lectures. Nobody's doing anything like this, and they were all very interested, and particularly interested as you look around about how enormously successful they were. And so my first job is to thank the people who made these lectures successful. First and foremost, for organizing them, that's Alan Reed. In addition, I think anybody who thought about what it takes to prepare a lecture like this realize that the lecturers that are gone already, and more now because yesterday was the day, have a remarkable job of presenting material to this kind of audience. It's just remarkable, and I wanted to thank them also. And there's one more thank you. I found myself before every one of these lectures eagerly anticipating John's introductions, which was always interesting and amusing, getting more software skills than his original. Anyway, so I want to thank John for introducing the speakers. That leaves the second one. Basically, what I wanted to say was that since they've been successful, and since they're obviously a good idea, these lectures in some form are going to be continued. The exact form of which, since we've run out of million-dollar prizes, the exact form of which is not clear. I wanted to urge you to go on our website and watch the various speakers who are announcing along with the call that we're basically
All right. So, to pick up where I left off, let's see. Yeah. So, this was the last one that I did, which I just posted a video about. Whereas in my first animation, I separated my quarter circle into 12 pieces, which gave me 48 pieces in the entire circle. Here you see the 3 accentuated lines. The middle one is the circumference, or in this case, the quarter circumference of the unicircle. This was my epicycle piece, which I used to animate around. See my other videos, separated into 12. There's this one, As you can see, I separated my piece into 10, which gave me which gave me 10 along the quarter circumference, and here is the unit circle. This is the unit circle minus a half. This is the unit circle plus a half. So this radius out here would be 3 halves. 1, 1 half, 1 half. But the problem, or the curiosity came in, and I did this because I couldn't separate my exterior circle into 5 halves, and or into 5s. And in my last video also, it's just worth noting as a tangential side note how I mentioned that there's no real fifth root of unity, just, or there's no 5 fifth roots. There's 1 fifth root, just as in there's no 4 quarter roots. There's the unit circle, I, -1, -I, and 1, and 0. So the 0th root would be a circle with a 0 circumference. I guess that would be, I'm trying to understand the concept of an infinitesimal, and that, I think, is one way to do it, that it would be, the I circle, which is what all my animations are kind of based, or these animations have been based upon, is this little circle at the top here, which would be the quarter circumference of this unit circle, which would go around 4 times, from the 0 to 1, I to the 0, I to the 1, I to the 2, I to the 3, I to the 4. Whereas this is -1, squared is 1, so it would revolve around once, twice back to itself. The 1 circle would revolve around the whole thing once. The -I circle would have to go around a couple times to get back, well, to get to 0 or 1, because it wouldn't do it at first. First it would go to -1, and then it would go, let's see, how would that go? Because that's 3 quarters. So it would go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So it would go around 3 times. But these are all not different, these aren't the same size. And then this little guy here, this dot, so that's the whole thing, with modular arithmetic and so on, which I don't understand at all. I barely studied it at all. And though you get the same results, that's the whole deal with the problems, is that if you're dealing with a dynamic system, if you're dealing with revolutions, you can't just deal with the results. That's not, I suppose I will tell you some things, but that's not good enough. These are not the same things. But anyway, I guess that's getting a little bit off the point, which is my whole 4 and 5 and now 3 thing. And originally I'd watched a video about this, which was how unit circle divided into 3, where these dotted lines, these dotted circles, you can see point inward 3 times, so that would be a 3rd root of unity, kind of. But then the pinky, purpley, reddish color, is pointing down 4 times. So it was a whole question. I think it was on, I don't know if it was some advanced math test semi-famous question. I don't know if it was in Russia or America or China or where it was, but how many times does it revolve, rotate, whatever? And revolutions and rotations and all that. It just drives me crazy. But yeah, this one, when I first discovered this, it made me crazy, and then I realized, like, well, if there's three makes four, then 4 probably makes 5, 5 makes 6, and so on. 2 makes 3, 1 makes 2, and so on. Which was what led me to do the whole 4-5 deal, which led me back to the 3 deal on the inside. Crazy. Awesome. Infuriating! That's how I feel about it, because I don't understand. The things I don't understand, they make me mad. And they shouldn't. I guess it's understandable that things I don't understand make me angry. If I were better, more perfect of a person, at best I suppose I'd be excited, and at worst I'd be set aside in curiosity to ponder the truth. But I'm not so often in that manner. But I guess before I make this too long, let's see. So let's see here. No. All right. Let's see what it'll be. Yeah. 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 So here we go. So once again, if you're looking at the green circle, it's pointing down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Except, okay, so I have this separated into 10, but I animated it in 20. So like this line is 1, this line is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8, 9, 10. But I animated it in 20 to try to make it smoother. So 0, half, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5, 5, 5.5, 6, 6.5, 7, 7.5, 8. So now they're pointing down again. On the outside, they're pointing down again. On the inside, notice this one's more or less lined up with 5. I've yet to calculate it and figure out if that's off by a hair, because I kind of had to fudge the animation because it's a hand-drawn thing that I then replicated into 4, so it's not quite right. But it's the best I could do, because I don't know like Photoshop and the animation programs and all that kind of thing. Like, I just know I have a simple little picture editor program that was like shareware on my 2003 computer, and I use that to make my animations. But anyway, that sounded like a poor me statement. And, I mean, it's not, but it is it's a distinction of what I can and can't do. because I don't know yet, but maybe I will, you know, and that's cool. I'll be happy to learn new things. So yeah, so now down, down, down. So this one initially has gone to here. The one that was here has gone to here, to here, to here. And again, it's really all just the same circle, but I've replicated it just to outline the distinction and show how this pentagon moves around, whether or not this pentagon is even like a real thing or can even be considered in the first place, but I'm considering it. And what's interesting about that is how now if we go back, uh-oh.
As they say, goes back to the ancient Greeks. I mean, the quotation and the terminology, of course, is obviously modern. But from this proposition, one can prove the following important theorem.
Once again, I say I ran out of tape, I got cut off. What I was trying to say last time was that this is pointing down, this is pointing up, and I made, you know, as this circle and this circle kind of follow each other around this line. So after discovering that though they meet the center 4 times, that they meet the horizon 5 times, I just figured, well, I'll do that the same on the inside. And it took me quite a while to animate this because basically these are all the same image that I drew, and then I color shifted them and repeated them, and then these lines are all individual, so I kind of had to, for every frame, place every line. So I was busy concentrating on that, and I didn't concentrate on what was actually happening on the inside circle. And what I was about to say last time is, you know, so this one goes from here, and it makes one rotation in respect to itself, you could say, but really it's in respect to this horizon, or to the x equals 0 horizon. You know, and that happens 8/10 or 4/5 before this comes back around and is pointing toward the center. This doesn't even make one complete rotation in respect to itself, when once again it's made one rotation in respect to the center. So follow this one. 0, half, 1, blah blah blah. So somewhere between here and here, it's gone 180 degrees. Pi over 2. When it gets back to here, it still hasn't reached the upward position. This spoke, this radius, still hasn't reached the upward position. So keep following it. So there it's a little further, there it's a little less, so we know it's somewhere between the two, and that's from the fact that when I made this, it wasn't divisible by 3, it's 40, and 40 petitions are on the whole circle, 10 petitions on the inner circle, so the whole thing isn't divisible by 3, so I can't, with this picture, display how, within respect to itself, with respect to the horizon, it rotates 3 times. And then I was trying to think of how I could prove that, and this came about easier than did the exterior 5 part. But you know that it hasn't rotated even once when it hits here. So when it's at the top, so we're at the top. Now somewhere in between there it's gone 90 degrees. Somewhere around there it's gone 180 degrees. But there it's gone exactly 3/4 top. So we know that it's made 3/4 of a rotation in 1/4 of a revolution, whereas the outside circle has made 5/4 of a rotation in respect to a quarter revolution. If you can call them these things, I feel very uncomfortable using those words, but for lack of better terms. So we know that it goes 3/4 and a quarter, so it'll go 6/4 and a half. It'll go 9/4 and 3/4. You know, it'll go 3/4 to here, 6/4 to here, 9/4 to here, 12/4 to here, back to the beginning. So we know in respect to itself, it's gone 12/4. 12 divided by 4, 3. So it revolves 3 times, or rotates 3 times in respect to the horizon. So that's a big deal. Now I have to do it again. I'm not going to mull over it for months. I'll probably do it in a little different of a way, but I'm going to have to, I got to see it. Illustrating things or demonstrating things, I don't know the right word, but drawing things out, seeing them. I think you have it, well, I won't say you. I think I have intuitions about things, or I think that I've come up with something in my mind, and then I draw it, and I was wrong, and I redraw it, and I was wrong, and I redraw it, and I was wrong. You know, and if I'm lucky, 1 out of 100 times, I'm either right, or I figure out, you know, the accumulations of all that wrongness. I'll finally figure out. In those moments, it's rewarding. Very rewarding. Then another thing worth noting is that because of the way I drew this, and because when I drew my circle, I used essentially mirror colors on each circle, so it makes the whole torus object, torusy looking object, so it may not be a torus, it might be, I don't know what it is, it might be like some kind of plane of inertia, I don't know what it is, but it looks torusy, but it doesn't necessarily have to. Kind of good illustration. The inside and outside are different, but because of the way I draw them, it kind of ties them together. But if we were to use opposing colors on the inside and outside, it would look something more like this, where it's separate things happening. And another thing worth noting I guess I'll show it in that drawing, but it took me a while to figure it out, is that there are little loops happening right here. On the outside, these come to a point on the outside, but on the inside there's this tiny little loop. And I'm just really interested between the two what's happening at this intersection. I guess I think energetically somehow, but I don't really understand it. I'm trying to learn about it, and when you don't know anything, you got to start somewhere. But also knowing that, again, it's beating a dead horse, but oh, it's not a dead horse. It ain't dead yet. It's like a zombie horse, beating a zombie horse. That there's, no unified theory, no popularly accepted or known, not part of the common vernacular, not part of the way we think about things, not part of like not part of the cultural reach. Our culture has a reach, and what do we reach for? And I'm guilty of it more than anything. And when I say all these things in the videos that I make, and when I talk about like, the introverts and the extroverts and the mouth breathers and like, when I seem as though I'm pointing the finger at other people, I admit I'm guilty. I am. I do that. I think that way. In my lesser moments, but in my better, greater moments, I understand that, that's me. Like when I say the introverts are taking over, I should hope that my introvert is taking over me. And when I talk about the extroverts having run everything forever, I should be talking about my own extroversion having been running me forever. Anyway, setting that aside, and I guess that's why it's up to all of us to start talking more and more about things that resonate with us, like I'm embarrassed, like I'd be embarrassed to talk about epicycles in public. Like I would hang my head. That's crazy. That's crazy. And epicycles get a bad rap too because of the whole, Galileo, pre-Galilean, Copernican revolution type deal, which is totally misunderstood anyway, and I don't even understand it, but I understand that much. Cycles get a bad rap. They seem like they're a pretty useful tool, a beautiful. I don't even know if you call, once it becomes an epicycle, I don't know if you call it geometry, but it seems to be. I think of geometry is just circles and lines, but and this is determined by circles and lines, kind of, but it's not exactly. Yeah, I see some different things. So, then that brings me to this whole deal once again. Oh boy.
generalize, well, in fact, they can all be generalized in certain ways. In problem 3, I wrote down a series of polynomial x squared plus 1 and asked if
Okay,
prime in that form.
so I'll try to finish this. This is the third day. I've keep running out of memory on my cards, so it's my third recording trying to make one video. And when I finished off, I was talking about the inner circle, the inner epicycle asteroid figure making a 3. So on the outside, we're getting our 5. And inside, we're getting our 3. On the perimeter itself, oriented toward the center of the circle, we're getting our 4. So that's a pretty significant. That's a pretty significant synchronicity with the 3, 4, 5 triangle. Of course, I mean, it seems like basically whatever you get for a number on the perimeter pointing to the inside, you're going to get +1, -1 on the outside and the inside. So I guess that doesn't. I guess the rule extended to greater numbers doesn't really follow, because if 5 was your inner unit perimeter division, then 4 + 5 wouldn't equal 6. But one thing that is, I think, definitely a big thing, and I already went over it to some degree, but the whole phi and omega, Eisensteinian omega connection, which I previously stated relates to something like that, as long as it's related to something like that. And this isn't obviously my idea or my work totally, barely at all, but I get little pieces from here and there. And this is where I was initially introduced to phi in the first place, as far as like a formula or some abstract way of understanding phi. Of course, plus and minus, that's a big deal. And I hope I get to it in this video, but here we have delta, which is essentially phi. But depending on what we define as x sub n determines x sub n minus 1 and x sub n minus 2. I have elsewhere in here where I've redefined x minus 2 as x, or x to the n minus 2 is x minus n, and then you get, I call it Dan Winter phi, which is traditional phi minus 1. So I consider phi as we normally know phi 1.618, blah blah, as traditional phi, and just 0.618 as phi. But if you consider you know, the entire plus or minus root plus or minus 1 instead of just 1. And then I guess if, you know, however you define x to the n, whether x to the n is your smaller number, and then you'd have x to the n plus 1 instead of minus 1, and x to the n plus 2 instead of minus 2, because having x to the n be your third number, then this is your smallest number, your second smallest number, your third smallest number, and then you'd have to rearrange, then you'd have to move into x to the sub n plus 1 plus 2 and so on. So in some sense it does make sense to make the 0.618 be your phi or be your constant unit. And in one way this doesn't matter because of all the ways that I don't even know what to say, the way in which phi weaves in and out of itself with 1. But in another sense it does matter. But if you're considering it as like a nexus or a matrix of numbers where like phi isn't phi, and actually this is, I guess, a kind of interesting connection with Eastern thought, which I know nothing of except for like really superficial YouTube searches of. But if you expand this out, you get this, you get this, you get this, and each one has 16 relationships, and at the end of it you get 64, and there's 64 characters or components or combination of characters of the I Ching. I don't know exactly, but I think that's a pretty interesting connection. And but what I wanted to get to with this, as far as the 5 and the 3 go, as far as the phi and the Eisensteinian omega go, is that if you're treating pluses and minuses equally, your clockwise and your counterclockwise equally, and you're kind of, you know, giving all of it equal weight. Like, and I'm very uncomfortable with plus and minus signs because of whenever you're dealing with plus and minus or positive and negative, like you're really dealing with something else, you know. Everything's positive in some sense. Like if it's extended, everything's positive, or then you'd have like growth and decay, but decay is a different kind of growth. You know, it's the opposite growth. It's two types of growth, but we call one manifestation a growth and the other decay, when in some sense both of them are combinations of two other types of growth. So you have two types of growth like combined in one way, and it's growth, and you have two types of growth combined in another way, and it's decay. But it's always this evolving, for lack of a trying to think of the right word. It's this always
Gauss experimented with tables of prime numbers, and after a good deal of thought and work and experimenting,
it's this progression of movement between two aspects of the unitary force, maybe? I don't know how exactly else to say. So anyway, looking back at that further equation, in some sense, we've already developed phi. But if we, instead of x sub n plus, instead of x sub n plus x sub n minus 1 equals x sub n minus 2, if we do an x sub n minus x sub x sub n minus 1, or however you want to do your n's and x's, you'll come up with the Eisensteinian omega. Now this gets back to what I was just saying about redefining the Dan Winter phi. I use a question mark sometimes instead of x. Yeah, so this is where I've redefined it, and in my conclusion I come up with plus or minus root 5 minus 1 over 2 instead of 1 plus or minus root 5 over 2, which I guess in some sense is a minor difference, but this is some a little bit of rational trigonometry to try to discern some things, and there's a lot I haven't come to on this. I'm really trying to find the square root of 5, but I can't seem to do it yet. This seems like a particularly important relationship, but if we're considering pluses and minuses equally, then this is equally as significant, and then there'd be a couple more, which I didn't get to. And then if you're dealing with your phi's as 0.618 instead of 1.618, then you come up with a little bit of different of a relationship with the whole phi progression. There's anything more important here, but again, this is all really related to the whole, root 5 connection with root 3. I hope to find it. Yeah, here we go. So if you have your x to the n equaling x to the n minus 1 minus x to the n minus 2 instead of plus, if you're treating plus and minus equally, or positive and negative equally, then you come up with a more Eisensteinian.
So that indicates that Li of x and pi of x are pretty close together.
Whenever I see two things adding together to make a third thing, like, if we have x to the n equals x to the n minus 1 plus x to the n minus 2, I'm thinking c squared equals a squared plus b squared. So then when I see this, I'm wondering if this is c squared equals, b squared minus a squared, or a squared minus b squared, or the absolute value of the difference between a and b. So I always wonder about that too whenever I see two things equaling something. It's a natural curiosity to wonder, are we really dealing with two squared things equaling something? Which is another reason why I'm, another reason why
If you have a result that tells you that pi of x is approximately the logarithmic integral of x, then you also know that psi of x is approximately x.
I'm curious about the whole three-dimensionality of this object, and sometimes maybe, you just have two things added together, and they're the third thing, and it's a linear thing, and so on. But being as though this all seems to go back to the fact that we call it phi in the first place, and that the Eisensteinian omega, even though it was developed in whatever time,
you know, a couple hundred, few hundred years ago. I can't remember when Einstein was around, but 100 years ago, I don't know. It was all long before me, but he named it Omega, you know. He didn't name it
and was able to give estimates for the size of psi of x, and therefore, as I indicated in the previous report, he made an estimate for pi of x down here. He showed that it was in between two multiples of the logarithmic integral of x, and he also showed something else with this machinery. If the limit pi of x over li of x exists,
well, some people talk about how the ancients knew everything, and some people talk about how they, you know, ancients didn't know anything. You know, but then you think back to, well, I think, and I don't know barely anything at all, but like about Hemachandra and like basically how Hemachandra numbers I've heard and I've inspected to some degree, or I've looked into to some degree how the Hemachandra numbers are like, you know, the parent of the Fibonacci numbers. And I just got that from some weird dude on YouTube, and I use weird in the absolute best way. I mean it. Well, I'm very grateful.